Hello everyone. So in this week we will be discussing about evolution of sustainability within design, how diverse approaches to design for sustainability exist, why they exist, and the relationship between these approaches and their application context. This week will help you in trying to know about all these approaches, and it will also enable you with the knowledge on how to use these different approaches depending on the context to which you have to apply it. So let's go ahead now. So in order to understand the evolution of design for sustainability as a concept, or to understand how sustainability evolved during the whole design journey, we will first try to understand the history. We start from somewhere in the late 1960s. It is a time from which the environmental issues as an impact of the production and consumption system on ecological equilibrium began to be raised by different organizations, different people. So the major reason for these discussions to emerge was because people slowly started realizing all the environmentally damaging effects being caused due to industrial revolution. Next, from around the 1970s, the first scientific research to understand the impact of different kinds of activities on environment, on human beings and so on started cropping up. Also, it is during this time that there were various international level studies also which were conducted, and debates started happening in this particular area. Most of these studies and debates considered the deterioration and exhaustion of natural resources as an undesirable effect of industrial development. People were more concerned about the fact that what happens if we run out of coal. People became very concerned what happens if we run out of all the iron ore. The natural limits, thus the concept of natural limits of our world, of our planet came into being. It became more apparent in the light of both uncontrollable technological and productive development, as well as the increase of the world's population. It was also the time from which the medical facilities enabled people to have longer lives, to ensure lesser and lesser mortality rate at birth. Thus the world's population also started increasing way much faster than what it had happened in decades before that. During the 1980s and 1990s, international debate about environmental issues intensified further, and it spread further and further. Also, public opinion started shaping up, which also started putting pressure on different institutions and governments and to look into ecological norms and policies, productive activities, and so on. In this particular part of the time, a concept called polluter pays principle came up. What it implies is whoever causes the pollution should pay for it. So more and more sanctions were imposed on the industries because it was assumed that because of their industrial activities, the pollution is being caused. UNEP, which is United Nations Environmental Program, and other such institutions then they started becoming the people who watch things related to cleaner production, and they defined cleaner production as the continual redesigning of industrial processes and products to prevent pollution and the generation of waste and risk for mankind and the environment. So what you can see here is we realize that we have polluted our lakes, we have polluted our rivers. So we realize that we have to do two kind of things. First thing is we have to take our industrial processes towards cleaner and cleaner processes so that we do not end up polluting our rivers and ponds, or say polluting our air or polluting our soil and so on. We also realize that we have to do some cleaning activities of our existing water bodies, air, soil because we have already caused damaging effects to them. So these were the two approaches which started gaining momentum, both in terms of public opinion, policies, and also at the end of research, where people started trying to find out what are the different impacts, how things can be cleaned up. In 1987, a very interesting development happened. So, in our last week, we read about the definition of sustainable development. This definition, as we read last week, it said a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So, in 1987, this particular definition was coined. So, this definition was coined during the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development. The commission was set up to provide indicators regarding the future of humanity. So, this report was called Our Common Future and was the first to define sustainable development. Before that, more and more policy level work or industrial activity level work was more on the side of preventing pollution from happening or cleaning up of the existing polluted resources. From here on, the concept of sustainable development as a systemic development, as a development which has to happen on all the three sectors, that is social, economic, as well as environmental, started cropping up. During the 1990s and 2000, mostly there was international debate about the environmental issues. These issues reached their maturity during this decade. The Caring for the Earth, a strategy for sustainable living. It's a publication for the World Conservation Union, IUCN, by the United Nations Environment Program, along with Worldwide Fund for Nature. Now, because of Worldwide Fund for Nature coming in, a new competing definition came up of sustainable development, which states improving the quality of human life within the limits of capacity to protect the ecosystem. So, if you compare it against the 1987 definition, which says sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It does not clearly talk about ecosystems. The whole definition is in terms of the needs of human beings, the present as well as the future, that the needs of today's generation and the future should be fulfilled. Now, you can see in this particular definition, which says improving the quality of human life within the limits of capacity to protect the ecosystems, I first time bring in quality of human life and capacity to protect the ecosystems. So, this definition accentuates the possibility to actually improve human life conditions while safeguarding the Earth's capacity to regenerate its resources. So, these two definitions considered together help us to describe sustainable development in a manner in which we can practice, that is, we can do design, so that benefits are brought both to the human beings as well as the ecosystem. So, if you see this ecosystem definition, it also implies that we have to protect the bees. We have to put in place ways and methods which helps us to protect the bees, protect the tigers, because they are part of the ecosystem, the larger ecosystem. To be more specific, in 1992, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCD, was held in Rio de Janeiro. Then in 1994, Sustainable Development and Environmental Sustainability have formed a fundamental benchmark in the Environmental Action Program of the European Commission as well. So, now you can see slowly in this particular decade, especially after the 1987 event where the definition of sustainable development were cropped in, more and more initiatives were taken by various international organizations as well as policy making organizations in order to build in definitions of sustainable development as well as build in action plans for sustainable development and environmental sustainability. These also became benchmarking frameworks so that activities of the whole country or maybe a region can be benchmarked against these plans. Following the Johannesburg conference and almost 10 years from Rio de Janeiro conference, which was 1987, the necessity of awareness and active engagement of all social participants involved in the production consumption circuit is even more present and pronounced was realized. What does this mean? So, if you see from the late 1960s up to almost 1987, or we can say more towards the mid of 1980s, the concerns were more towards how do I select methods of producing products and services which do not cause pollution to the environment or which cause less pollution to the environment. Mostly it was concerned with the fact that it causes less damage, and also how do I clean up all the damages which I have done. So the whole focus was on the production side, because people felt that it is the industrial production which causes all the damaging effects. But slowly, post the development of sustainable development started shaping up, we started realizing that it's not the production side only. The major challenge is the consumption side. We realize that the rate at which we are consuming at this moment, we cannot continue at the same rate, because if we do not reduce our consumption, we will still be making our planet unsustainable. Our ecosystem will not be able to sustain us. So, thus comes the concept that we need to look at the production consumption circuit. You can still see that we are talking about production and consumption. So, it started by understanding, okay, how do I make my production greener and also my consumption greener. Slowly, the shift went to consumption and production. So, if you see in the end of this paragraph, I am talking about consumption and production. So, it's not like reversing the words without having a meaning for it. It has a deep meaning inside it. So, as I told you earlier, it was thought that all the environmental damages, all the unsustainability are being caused mostly by the polluting industries, that is the production processes. Slowly it was realized that okay, our consumptions are also very high. So, in order to bring in sustainability, I have to look at the production consumption circuit. It was also realized, say I make a biodegradable product, a consumer uses the product, at the end of the life the consumer might not have access to a process for biodegrading that product. Not all of us own a paper composting machine at home. Not all of us own a paper recycling machine at home. Neither do we take the effort of taking our paper to a composting unit or a recycling facility. So, when we talk about the production and the consumption circuit, what it also implied that the producer has to take charge of the fact that they have to build in a mechanism in the market so that all these papers which need to be recycled or needs to be decomposed can be collected back from the consumers. As a result, we call it production consumption circuit. So, in our first lecture, I had given you one example on how moving the air conditioners to without any star ratings to the 5-star rating stages had an impact on increase in consumption. So, earlier when air conditioners were high power consuming machines, lesser number of people bought the air conditioners because the running cost of an air conditioner was very high. Now, because of all the environmental norms coming into picture, all the environmental related policies, it was mandated upon the manufacturers to start selling electronic products with star rating, and with the mandate that slowly they have to phase out all products which have a star rating of 1 to 3 and keep products which have a star rating of 4 to 5. So, once the star rated air conditioners came into the market, the star rated air conditioner meant that because the machine is more efficiently designed, the machine consumes lower and lower energy. So, now although my air conditioner, the initial price of the air conditioner went up, the running cost of the air conditioner fell drastically. A 5-star air conditioner's running cost is very low as compared to its previous generations of air conditioners. So, more and more people could now afford air conditioners. So, although the industry moved towards more energy efficient technology, the impact on the energy requirement of the society went way much higher. Why? Because the consumption rose up. Hence, it was slowly realized that if we try to target sustainability from production to consumption, it's not the right approach. We have to target it from the consumption as our priority, because we have to bring the consumption to sustainable rates, and then we also work on the production side of it. Another example for the same. Say all of us own a washing machine. How long does that washing machine work? Maybe 1 hour daily. If you do not have lots of people in your house, it might work only 1 hour in 2 weeks, or 1 hour in 1 week, or 1 hour in 3 days. So, a washing machine which is full of so many material components and it is owned by each and every household is being used for such a short span of time. And I am as a society, I am consuming so many washing machines, which is so much of metal, so much of plastics. Even if I make a very efficient washing machine, still because of my consumption of washing machines in terms of numbers is so high, my consumption of resources will be the material resources of the earth will be very high. But say instead of that, if I build washing machines which can be owned by an entire building, then the chances that the washing machine will be running for many hours in a particular day. So, if it's a building with 20 households, the possibility that the washing machine can run for about 20 hours daily is high. It might run for 10 hours a day, which is way much more better utilization of all the materials that I have spent onto it. So, I could bring in reduction in material consumption by influencing the consumption pattern. Hence, in this particular decade, the shift also started focusing on production consumption as a circuit, and then finally it shifted to sustainable consumption and production patterns. So, you can see I am first talking about circuit, which means how do I produce, how do I distribute my products, how I consume my products, the entire system. Now, I am talking about pattern. So, the last statement over here which talks about sustainable consumption and production patterns. So, what I am talking about here is habits, how people are habituated to consume something, and how I have to devise strategies so that people start consuming it in a sustainable manner. It comes into their habit, and as a result I bring in sustainable consumption as well as production. So, in this particular time, a significant event was setting up of the UNEP Sustainable Consumption Unit in May 2000. So, again you can see it talks about Sustainable Consumption Unit. So, this whole unit's main purpose was to try to understand consumption and try to strategize on sustainable consumption. So, the initial assumption was that in spite of the progress made by the industrial world and enterprise during the last decade, the extent to which consumption exceeds the Earth's capacity to supply resources and absorb waste and emissions is still dramatically evident. Because of this, they realize that we have to actually work on the consumption side more heavily. So the Marquis process, a joint initiative by UNEP, that is United Nations Environmental Program, and UNDESA, which is United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, they came together to promote and support regional and national initiatives. In context of sustainability, it is very important to understand that one sustainability strategy is not applicable globally, not even nationally, not even at the state level. So, we have to promote and support regional and national initiatives which might have different nature depending on the context to promote the shift towards sustainable consumption and production patterns. So, the result of the efforts was a draft of a 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production SCP, which were then negotiated by different countries at the 19th session of the UN Commission on Sustainable Development in 2011. So, different countries set different targets for themselves, different ways of achieving them depending on their context. And these are all 10-year frameworks, and so these 10-year frameworks have been repeatedly formed one after the another to keep on moving towards higher and higher goals. In 2006, the European Council adopted an ambitious and comprehensive sustainable development strategy for the enlarged European Union. The renewed European Union SDS sets out a single coherent strategy on how the EU will more effectively live up to its long-standing commitment to meet the challenges of sustainable development. It recognizes the need to gradually change our current unsustainable consumption and production patterns and move towards a better integrated approach to policy making. Why policy making? Because these policy making will further help in bringing actual practice related activities in various organizations which can take them further into the society. It reaffirms the need for a global solidarity. So, everybody should agree with sustainability, the idea of sustainability, and recognize the importance of strengthening our work with partners outside EU. So, in our previous lectures, we spoke about sustainability as a domain which is connected in time, which is connected in space. So, I cannot look up at sustainability only from my country's perspective, only from my region's perspective. Hence, the need for strengthening and working with partners outside the EU, especially with a special focus on developing countries. Why so? Because the developing countries were at that point of time going through the same kind of industrial revolution which the already developed countries of the time had gone through, and they have realized all the unsustainabilities that they have brought in. So, if we it was realized that if changes in pattern of industrialization, in patterns of consumption is brought in the developing countries, so that before entering into the unsustainability zone, they directly go into the sustainable consumption production zone. Hence, the importance of partnering with developing countries. In 2009, the European Council that sustainable development remains a fundamental object of the European Union under the Lisbon Treaty was made. It was emphasized in this review that the Union's sustainable development strategy, the strategy will continue to provide a long-term vision and constitute the overarching policy framework for all European Union policies and strategies. Also, the decade starting from 2005 to 2014 was designated by UNESCO as Decade on Education for Sustainable Development. Because until and unless we do not know what sustainable development is, because its sustainable development can be achieved through sustainable consumption in a big way, So actually each and every person should know about sustainable development, about what is sustainability, about sustainable consumption. Hence, an urgent need to have a decade on education for sustainable development. The decade aimed to integrate the values inherent in sustainable development into all aspects of learning. Maybe kindergarten, college education, research work, in all aspects, to encourage changes in behavior that will enable a more viable and fairer society for everyone. During this decade, education for sustainable development contributed to citizens becoming better equipped to face the challenges of the present and the future, and decision makers acting more responsibility to create a viable world. The Supreme Court of India had actually passed rules saying that all school curriculum in India will have to have a course on environmental studies. Some other developments. So, we spoke till now more about starting from the industrialized context, all the efforts which are being done by the United Nations and the European Commission. Now, coming to the Asian countries. Because the Asian countries followed a different developmental cycle and they had different developmental requirements, their history followed a different course of action. So in 1974, His Majesty King Bhumibol Adulyadej, he was the king then of Thailand. He came up with this concept called philosophy of a sufficiency economy. We will go more into depth of what sufficiency economy is in later parts of this course. So, why this kind of a philosophy? So, this philosophy emphasizes the revitalization of natural resources, conserving cultural heritage, and prioritizing human development and people's well-being. So, you can see the Asian countries at that point of time, the same timeline which I have been talking about, was undergoing a different sort of development. Most of them were getting owning their freedom from the colonization that might have happened to them. Their society was trying to develop, trying to bring in development. So for them, the requirements of the society, the requirements of the human beings, the requirement of social development, the economic development had a very different structure. Hence, the king came up with this kind of a philosophy. And again, if you see the three main emphasis of the philosophy, it talks about revitalization of natural resources, which implies that if natural resource has got damaged, then you revitalize it. Conserving the cultural heritage, so we should not lose our cultural heritage, and prioritizing human development. Again, they form part of the three dimensions of sustainability. In May 2006, the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan presented the first ever Human Development Lifetime Achievement Award to His Majesty the King in recognition of his visionary thinking and 60 years of contribution to human development in Thailand. Coming closer to in India. So, you might be aware of the Khadi movement. So, it started somewhere around 1918, conceptualized by visionaries like Mahatma Gandhi. The Khadi movement is regarded as a great example of product service system model, which is an empowerment based model of sustainability. So, it talks about empowering people so that people are in charge of their economic activities, they take care of their environment around them, because it will have an impact on their economic as well as social activities. And because they are empowered, now they have economic power, they also get more socially empowered. We will discuss more on how this Khadi movement and its connection with product service system model when we go into the details of what product service system model is and what is its connection with sustainability. So, you can see this is as early as 1918. So, these movements are very different. They are more focused on two contexts, which are developing contexts, where the prime requirement is development of the prime requirement is human development and people's well-being, and most of these people are poor at the given instance of time, and they require creation of new economic opportunities, creation of avenues in which they can protect their environment. In 2015, you must have heard about the Paris Agreement. It has been quite a lot in news. So Paris Climate Accord or Paris Climate Agreement was signed. It's an agreement within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, dealing with greenhouse gas emissions and its ways of mitigation, adaptation and finance. And the agreement is supposed to take effect from 2020. The language of the agreement was negotiated by representatives of 196 countries at the 21st conference of these parties in the Paris Convention, and it was adopted by consensus on 12th of December in 2015. So the agreement aims to respond global climate change threat by keeping a global temperature rise for this century well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Each and every country who is a signatory to this agreement had to come up with their own strategies to achieve the same, because again each country is a different context, each country is in a different level of industrialization, has different kinds of consumption patterns, production techniques, ways of producing energy. So each and every country was asked to come up with their own strategies, with their own goalposts, and as a whole, as a globe, everybody is supposed to together achieve the target that the global temperature rise for this entire century should be below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius if that is possible. Also in 2015, that was signed, the previous one was signed in December 2015, this one is from September 2015. It's about transforming our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So this agenda is a plan of action for people, planet and prosperity. It consists of 17 sustainable development goals and 169 targets. It has 4 important criteria: people, planet, prosperity, peace and partnership. Again, in this particular agenda also, all the signing countries, they had to come up with their own strategies to achieve the 17 sustainable development goals and the 169 targets. The target is set for 2030. In the domain people, a higher priority is supposed to be given to end poverty and hunger in all their forms and dimensions, and to ensure that all human beings can fulfill their potential in dignity and equality and in a healthy environment. For the planet, it is protect the planet from degradation, including through sustainable consumption and production, sustainable managing its natural resources, and taking urgent action on climate change so that it can support the needs of the present and future generations. On the criteria of prosperity, ensure that all human beings can enjoy prosperous and fulfilling lives, and that economic, social and technological progress occur in harmony with nature. Peace is another important aspect, where it is asking to encourage to foster peaceful, just and inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. And the most important thing, partnership, in order to achieve all these things. Mobilize the means required to implement this agenda through a revitalized global partnership for sustainable development. So no longer look specific to a region, although we have region specific strategies, but we are supposed to partner with all the other global, in all other initiatives happening in all other region, and achieve the agenda by 2030. So how do we summarize this historical development in terms of design? because at the end of the day we are supposed to use all these developments into design and design the future consumption and production. So we saw design for sustainability, D4S as it is called in many places, has over the years changed from. So first you make up, you already understood that you have dirtied your lake. So clean up a polluted lake. So intervention after process caused damage. The process here was industrial production, or say my habit of throwing garbage. So our intervention after process caused damage, example, clean up a polluted lake. 2. Use clean technologies to avoid polluting the lake. So maybe I use some water treatment facility in my industry so that my water is treated. So I am using a cleaner technology. So I avoid polluting the lake. So which means now intervention in the process itself. Thereafter, design products and services that do not necessitate processes that could pollute a lake. So why do we even need to clean up that water? Why don't we develop products and services that just do not necessitate me in any particular way to go and pollute the lake? So that is intervention in the products and the services rather than the manufacturing processes, which was the earlier case. 2. Finally, intervention in consumption patterns, that is, understand which consumption patterns do not or less require products with processes that could pollute that lake. So say for example, if we start washing our clothes with say ultrasonic waves, which means we do not require soap, so the soap has a damaging effect on the environment. Can that way of consumption patterns of cleaning your clothes without soap is a change in consumption pattern, because I have to change my mindset that clothes can be cleaned without a washing powder. It can be cleaned with something which is totally invisible, which is ultrasonic waves. So that can be a pattern, but we have to understand how do we change people's pattern of consumption of, that is, cleaning clothes. Or say for example, I redesign clothes which just do not need to be cleaned, do not need to be washed. Again, we have to bring in a change in pattern, because it might be very awkward for a person to adapt to the whole situation in which he or she stops washing clothes. So the final one is intervention in the consumption patterns, so that we understand which consumption pattern do not or less require products with processes that could pollute the lake. Now coming to expansion in role of design. So the first one which you saw, it was like emphasis shifts from end of pipe controls, like I have done the damage, now let me take remedial actions. The emphasis has shifted away from end of pipe controls and remedial actions to prevention. The emphasis expands. It does not mean that the water bodies, say for example, which we have already polluted, they do not need to be cleaned. They need to be cleaned. But our current role as designers, we need to think, because we know certain activities will cause pollution. So we need to shift our emphasis. We need to shift our emphasis from end of pipe controls or remedial actions to something in which we can prevent that thing from happening altogether. The emphasis expands from isolated parts of the product life cycle to a holistic life cycle perspective. So rather than designing a product, rather than designing a mobile phone, I think in terms of how that mobile, I design the entire life cycle, how the raw materials need to be procured, how they need to be assembled into a product. Certain assembly processes might require more energy than other processes. Certain raw materials which I am using might be more rare earth materials, or maybe extraction of them are more polluting. Then how do I distribute it to people? How people after using it are supposed to discard it. So rather than designing just the mobile phone, I shift my attention to designing a holistic life cycle perspective, and only then I can reduce my unsustainabilities. The emphasis passes further into the socio-cultural dimension. Do I really need to encourage people to buy a mobile phone every 6 months, every 1 year? Of course, it maximizes my profit. But can I find an alternative way of maximizing my profit without creating an environmental burden of such huge quantities of e-waste? So emphasis further passes into the socio-cultural dimension, into territory where the designer becomes a hinge or link between the world of production and that of the user, and the social or societal surroundings in which those processes are taking place. So the emphasis widens towards enabling users alternatives and more sustainable lifestyle choices. If I do not know what is my alternative, if I do not understand the unsustainabilities I am bringing in, I might not be able to move to a alternate. So as a designer, you have to also enable your users to be able to consume sustainably through knowledge, through awareness, and through availability of products and incentives to adopt them. Hence, our approaches for design will be selection of resources with low environmental impact, design of products with low environmental impact, product service system design for eco efficiency, and design for social equity and cohesion. We will try to understand each of these approaches, and in the entire course of this course, we will go through each and every approach and see how do we design using each and every approach, and under what context each and every approach is more suitable. So the reading material that I will suggest for this particular week is, and the first one is a paper. It's called Evolution of Design for Sustainability, from Product Design to Design for System Innovations and Transitions. The second is a book. So please go through part 1, chapter 1 of the book, Product Service System Design for Sustainability. The book which I mentioned, Product Service System Design for Sustainability, is a free to download book. So you can download it from the internet. In the next lecture, we will be talking about the diverse approaches to design for sustainability, which I brought in the last slide, and thereafter the relationship between the approach and the application context. Thank you.